I got a 36 on the ACT, and over the last 6 years, I've helped thousands of students get to their dream scores as well. In this video, we're going to be going over exactly how I took my own score from a 31 up to that perfect score of a 36, even though I didn't think I was the best test taker. And so if you're not a great test taker or you don't think you're doing well on standardized tests, then this video is for you. And even if you don't consider yourself to be the best high school student, this video is still for you because we'll still pick up a lot of information about how to improve your score on the ACT. So going way back in time to the end of my sophomore year of high school, I thought I was a great high school student, was doing pretty well in my AP classes, was doing pretty well on like all of my test taking that I'd done in the past and everything like that. And I was actually trying to be recruited for baseball. So I wanted to get a good ACT score early on to kind of prove to colleges that I knew what I was doing and that I was eligible to be recruited by some of the better, like higher academic colleges. So decided to go ahead and take the test earlier than most people, which was actually a great decision, but we'll get to that later. But what happened is I was super confident, went into the test thinking that I was all this, doing well in my AP classes, honors classes, all that stuff. But as soon as I sat down and took the test, I realized pretty quickly that I didn't actually know what I was doing. The test was super weird. Going into like a testing center, taking a random standardized test on a Saturday with a bunch of other kids in the room that I didn't know, all that stuff. And the questions themselves just did not line up with anything that I'd ever seen in a high school class before. I thought that because I was really good at high school classes, I would also just be really good at the ACT, but that was absolutely not the case. Specifically on the math section, I was running into a lot of those questions where they asked like huge long paragraph questions, and I was spending a bunch of time just not even understanding what the question was asking. I would read the question like 3 or 4 times and still have absolutely no idea what was being asked. And then on the reading and science sections, I had absolutely no chance of finishing those sections on time because I just didn't know what I was doing. I ended up walking out of that test center on that test day thinking that I was completely screwed, thinking that I would have no chance at getting into a great college or earn a bunch of scholarship money. And I also thought that college coaches for baseball that I was trying to get recruited for would probably laugh me out of the room if I showed up with a not great ACT score. Well, when scores came back a few weeks after that, I ended up with a 31. So overall, not a completely terrible score, obviously very respectable overall, but definitely not where I wanted to be and definitely not where I knew I should be in terms of what my goals were. If I wanted to get into some of the best colleges and I wanted to earn the most scholarship money, I knew I would have to be better than that. A 31, while it's a good score, puts you barely on the borderline of being accepted at some of the top Ivy League schools. And obviously there are some great scholarships to get unlocked with that 34, 35, or 36. So what I did is I went back to what I knew, which was going back and studying all of the concepts that I knew were being tested on the ACT. Went back and studied all of the English stuff, all of the grammar rules like semicolons, colons, periods, conjunctions, all of that stuff. On the math section, studied all of my geometry, statistics, algebra 2, algebra 1, all of that good stuff. And then reading and science, I did as much reading comprehension and as much science knowledge studying as I possibly could. I ended up taking another test and went into this one a lot more confident because I had just done probably over 100 hours of studying. One of my advantages back at that point in time was that I was willing to put in as much work as I thought was necessary. So I spent countless hours, probably over 100 hours studying all of these things, working through practice worksheets, working with teachers on the side to brush up on all of my English and math knowledge and all of that stuff. So I went into this test a lot more confidently. But what happened is I sat down at the testing room and felt pretty good on the English section, felt like I was doing a little bit better. And then when I got back to the math section, I realized that I had made a big mistake in my studying. Because as soon as I got into maybe question 20 or 30 or so, somewhere in the middle to the end of the test, I started reading these, again, complicated, long, drawn-out math problems that had like a full paragraph of text. And I started realizing that I was reading these questions 3 or 4 times again and not actually understanding what the question was asking. And this completely threw me for a loop because I had just done all of my math studying. Why was I not understanding these questions that the ACT was asking me? And so I ended up wasting a bunch of time again on that math section and feeling pretty terrible about my abilities to do math in general. So going into the reading and science tests, similar things happened where I thought I was brushed up on all of my reading comprehension and all of my science knowledge, but the questions just didn't seem to even care about my science knowledge or my reading knowledge. I ended up being lost and confused, again, walking out of that next test that I took, and felt even more depressed than I did the first time because I had done a ton of studying and felt about the same, maybe a little bit better, maybe a little bit worse coming out of that second test than I did the first test. And surprise, surprise, my score was still a 31. I did not improve at all on the ACT the second time that I took it, even though I'd spent over 100 or so hours studying all of my content knowledge. So again, that was even more depressing because the first time I took it, it was at least like, oh, I didn't know what I was doing. I hadn't done any studying. But the second time I took it, after spending 100 hours studying and my score didn't go anywhere, not a great outcome. I was obviously missing something that was going on with the ACT. I felt like I knew all of the stuff, all of the content that was being tested on the test, but I just didn't know how to answer the questions that they were asking. It was like they were asking questions in a different language, and I just couldn't figure out why I couldn't understand the questions. And at this point, I was pretty much ready to write off the ACT as just a test where, okay, I'm just going to get a 31 and I'm not going to get the most scholarship money possible. I'm not going to get into the best schools. But again, 31 is not too bad. So I'll just kind of take it and I'll cut my losses. I'll stop studying because I've already spent over 100 hours studying and I didn't improve. Why would I spend any more time doing this? Maybe I'll just try and be better at baseball and see if that gets me anywhere. So for a few months, I just kind of ignored the ACT, didn't really think about it too much. And then one day I was doing baseball practice as I normally would be. And a couple of my friends and I on my high school team were actually hitting with a baseball legend, Gary Sheffield, in case you have never heard of him or you're not a baseball fan. He is one of the best baseball players of all time. He ranks like in the top 30 or top 20 in terms of all-time home runs. He's up there in terms of average. He's great overall baseball player. And so we were fortunate enough to have him kind of coaching us a little bit on our hitting one day. But interestingly enough, he actually made more of an impact on my ACT score than he did on my mediocre baseball career, which is surprising to say the least. So that day that we were working with Gary, a couple of my teammates and I were just warming up in the batting cages, just hitting balls off the tee. Again, if you don't know what that is, that's fine. Just basically warming up to try and get ready to, get into like a full practice. And then what happened is once we were finished warming up, one of my teammates asked Gary if we were going to be hitting off of a pitching machine, which is a machine that basically just spits out baseballs for the hitters to swing at. So it's just a way of practicing that is pretty standard in terms of baseball practice. And Gary's response here is what actually turned my ACT journey around. His entire response to that was absolutely not. Do not ever use a pitching machine to try and practice your hitting because it looks absolutely nothing like what the actual game will look like. If you're practicing with a pitching machine and somebody is placing a ball into a machine and then it's coming off of just a couple different wheels that are spinning super fast, then it's going to look absolutely nothing like what it looks like in the game when a pitcher is actually throwing the ball overhand and it comes in at a different angle and the release point is different and all of that stuff. So basically, his whole summary was like, why would you practice something in a way that's different than what you'll see in the actual game? And so basically, as soon as he said that, I realized how perfectly that translated over to what I was doing for the ACT. I was studying all of my content knowledge. I was studying grammar rules like semicolons, colons, geometry rules. I was trying to study reading comprehension, science, like chemistry stuff. But I wasn't actually doing so in a way that was similar to what the ACT was testing me on. I was doing so in a way that was like what I would see in a high school classroom or a high school test. And those two things are not the same at all. Basically, I was hitting off of a pitching machine and messing up my swing and messing up my timing when I should have been hitting off of a real person throwing a baseball overhand rather than sticking it into a pitching machine. So this was a pretty good wake-up call for me. And it led me to work with real ACT practice questions and real ACT practice tests instead of just working with the concepts that I knew were being tested on the ACT. So I found a bunch of old practice tests and spent basically all of my time, instead of studying content like I was just studying these practice tests. I just took a bunch of these practice tests over and over again. And again, this is where my willingness to put in as much time as necessary, or as much time as I thought was necessary into this test, really paid off, because I ended up taking over a dozen practice tests from old ACTs. And at 3 hours per practice test, that ends up coming out to 36 to 40 hours, depending on how many exact tests I took. So again, was willing to put my nose to the grindstone and just really hone in on what I thought was best at the time. And after spending this much time looking at real ACT practice questions, I started to notice a bit of a pattern. There were only so many different ways that the ACT was asking these questions. Like there was just this, basically the same questions showing up over and over again with different numbers, maybe slightly different wording, but overall, it was just the same questions over and over again. So looking back through the dozen or so tests that I took, I was able to actually categorize each question into like different buckets or different question types. So there's like time questions on the math section. There's semicolon, colon questions on the English section, et cetera, et cetera. Each question has a question type that you can pair it up with, and basically there's only so many of these question types that the ACT has. So now all I had to do was come up with a way to actually solve each of these question types, so that if I saw one of these time questions on the math section, it was just recognition of, okay, next time I see a time question, I just do this process, and that's all I need to do. And again, this is where it's not just tips and tricks, but it was my willingness to actually work very diligently and put hundreds of hours into studying and preparation. All of that stuff really paid off because I just spent a bunch of time going through finding all of the types of practice questions or all of the types of questions and coming up with the best way to solve each one of these. I used all of the free resources out there, Khan Academy YouTube videos, Google searches, Grammarly for the English section, just basically anything that I could find to come up with different ways of solving practice questions. And on top of that was also like consulting with teachers and consulting with peers to see how other people solve these questions. Basically, I ended up with the most efficient way of solving each type of question, each bucket of question. I now had a good approach for solving that type of question, so that when I saw it on the next test, the next practice test that I took, or the next real ACT that I took, I would have a perfect way of approaching that specific question. And shortly after I was able to find the most efficient way of solving each question type, I ended up scoring my perfect 36 on the real ACT. And again, this is where I got this nice little letter. This isn't the exact one. This is one that I actually took more recently because I stay up to date on all of my ACT testing, so I still take it even though I'm well out of high school now. Got this letter from the ACT CEO saying that congratulations, you got a perfect 36, and basically now you can write your own ticket for scholarships and college admissions. And so the result of all that was that I used that perfect 36 to get into schools like MIT, schools like University of Chicago, where I ended up attending. You look over my right shoulder here, that's the UChicago degree. Earned well into the hundreds of thousands of dollars range of different scholarships that I got. I actually ended up getting some Division I baseball offers that I probably shouldn't have gotten because coaches wanted me on the roster so that I could bring up the average ACT score of their school, everything like that. And I also got bragging rights over my older brother because my older brother didn't quite have a 36 on the ACT. He was just below that. So I got some bragging rights there too. So a lot of great benefits that I found from getting my perfect 36. So I know this sounds like a great story and everything like that. Okay, must be great for you, Carson. But the big takeaway for you, wherever you are in your ACT journey, whether you're in the mid-20s looking to get up to the upper 20s or 30 or into the low 30s, or if you're in the upper 20s, low 30s, and you want to get into that mid-30s range, close to that perfect score, there are a lot of good takeaways that you can have here. First things first, you need to be studying efficiently and effectively. Like I was doing, I was wasting my time originally. I spent hundreds of hours, maybe 100 hours or whatever it was. It was a lot of time that I completely wasted because I wasn't studying effectively. I was studying all the content stuff that I already knew without really having a strategy to approach the ACT. I didn't study specifically what my weaknesses were. I was studying things that were already my strengths. So first things first, you need to identify what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are and worry on the highest priority things, which should be your weaknesses. There's no reason to focus all your time on your strengths where you don't have as much room for improvement. And second, you could also learn from what I did even when I started doing things correctly and I started using real ACT practice questions. I still didn't do things most efficiently because I took about a dozen practice tests without really going in depth and reviewing the practice test that I had just taken. I just took like a dozen of them. What I should have done is taken like 2 or 3 and actually reviewed each practice test in depth. I should have been allocating way more time to reviewing the types of questions that I was missing rather than just taking practice tests for the sake of taking practice tests, because you actually make the improvement when you review your answers in depth and understand why you missed each question. So if you're not doing that with your practice tests, then you're missing out on massive gains that you could be having. And I probably wasted another 30 or so hours of time by taking a dozen practice tests when I should have just taken one and reviewed it very thoroughly. I should have taken the 3-hour test and spent like 3 or 4 hours reviewing it rather than taking a 3-hour test and then taking another 3-hour test and another 3-hour test. So it took me a lot longer to realize the patterns of questions versus if I had just really spent time digging into the practice tests that I was taking and the questions that I was missing, I would have saved myself probably another 20 to 30 hours overall. And the next takeaway that you can have from this is that you should really be categorizing your misses into question types and coming up with an efficient, effective way for you to solve that question type. Because not everyone will have the same approach. Not everything clicks in the same way for different people. So you need to find an approach to a question type that works specifically for you. And that's pretty much the exact method that I use when students come to me looking for help. We figure out exactly where their weaknesses are, and we find ways to improve on those specific weaknesses until they don't have any more weaknesses. So you can take all this information and you can use it to improve your own ACT score. But if you want a bit of a shortcut and you want to work with a professional who's done this for many years, then go ahead and click the link down below, find out some more information about our program, and you can apply to work with me directly from the link down there as well. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Subscribe, like, do all that stuff, and stay tuned for more information on college admissions, scholarships, and all of that good stuff.